There was a little smell like sulfur, burnt sulfur.
Several local fishermen who witnessed the foam felt most strongly that this was not normal tidal foam. Besides the fact that they're acquainted with the local conditions, I mean, there were several key features that just made it just stand apart. The sparkle, the way it dissipated, the sheer amount of it and the density of it implied something quite unusual.
I have been fishing that area for 45 years. I have never seen any foam like that ever on the water. And if you were motoring out through, going fishing, and you went through something like that, you would stop and say, "What's been going on here?"
As the fishermen searched the harbour, the RCMP contacted the Rescue Coordination Centre in Halifax. The RCC put out an urgent call to military and civilian sources, asking for reports of any missing aircraft along the eastern seaboard, from Labrador to Cape Hatteras. Coast Guard Cutter 101 from nearby Clark's Harbour was immediately dispatched to Shag Harbour to aid in the search effort.
It was so quiet and clear, and the sound travels over water that night, that they could hear the twin diesel engine starting up 13 miles away in Clark's Harbour. And then it raced over probably about 8 to 10 knots to get over to the area.
By the time 101 reached the area from the nearby life-saving station, the foam had dispersed, but the boats were still plying their lights on the water and looking for any clue as to what may have struck the water surface. Again, concern ran high for the possibility of survivors.
An hour later, the word was coming back from RCC in Halifax that nothing was missing. There was no military aircraft missing, no commercial aircraft missing, no private aircraft that were on flight plans were missing. So everybody at this point is wondering, well, what are we looking for?
There's nothing up there. We have nothing.
Something came out of the sky and went into the water at Shag Harbour, and nobody knew what it was.
Nobody seemed to know what it was that crashed in Shag Harbour that cold October night, but everyone agreed something had gone into the water and could still be resting there, perhaps something worth looking for. Shag Harbour was making waves in the media too. Newspapers, tabloids, and even a comic book jumped on a sensational headline story written by Chronicle Herald reporter Ray McLeod. It was not his usual sort of assignment.
We had reports of lights going down into the water, and the RCMP were telling us that their people had seen it, various people in the boats had gone out, and I was on the phone getting everyone I could to talk to me, and gradually started piecing together what had been seen that night. A contact I had in the armed forces gave me a number to call in Ottawa for a squadron leader, Bain, who tells me that he was heading a Canadian Armed Forces unit that basically investigated and cataloged UFOs. It was almost like the American Project Blue Book, which I had never heard of and didn't know existed. He said, yeah, this sounds like an incident that may have something concrete in it, which they made into a headline for the paper. In my judgment, it became a headline story because we had RCMP officers who not only saw it, but were making public statements that they saw it.
McLeod's hunch as a reporter warned him that this official candor was too good to be true.
One of the strange things was that at that time, the RCMP was totally cooperative because they were not sure what had happened and what had gone down. As the story progressed, we started to get less and less from the official source of the RCMP and more from just the ordinary people in the area who had seen something happen and had gone out in their boats to investigate it.
As officials intensified their search and prepared for an immediate dive, the locals began to pressure the RCMP for some answers.
I asked him if he found out anything about the plane yet, and he said they've identified it as a UFO. I asked him what he was talking about, more or less. He wouldn't say no more than that. That's all he would say.
On October the 7th, 2 days after the crash, Navy divers from HMCS Granby started searching the bottom of Shag Harbour for wreckage. But what this wreckage might be remained unspecified. The waters off Shag Harbour are shallow and the currents are strong. The Navy divers knew if the wreckage had not been swept out to sea, they would soon find it.
Now, as it turned out, they stayed on the dive until Sunday night, so that they'd done 2.5 days on the dive before they packed up and took whatever they had into an old deuce-and-a-half Army vehicle they called Old Sid.
They come in around noontime. They had a package, which they brought in and put in the Navy divers' van, and they left, and that was the end of all the diving.
Residents of Shag Harbour claim they watched as the military hauled something out of the harbour.
When they quizzed the divers about what this was, the divers simply responded by claiming that these things were markers they used on the bottom to keep their orientation. It's hard to imagine that you would have markers that would have in their description constituted a hazard when you're under the water. They were simply quite jagged, twisted, etc. It just doesn't line up.
Strangely enough, if you go by the military documents, the divers found nil. That's not a bit of anything. Nothing in the water. I'm looking forward to having a look at that slide.
Yeah,
Robert.
I am too, because I haven't seen it for quite some time, and it'd be nice to look at it again.
So sure.
After you.
Thank you.
No one has ever learned what the Navy pulled out of Shag Harbour in that week in 1967. Local investigators would have to look elsewhere for clues to the origin of the crashed object. One such clue may come from the night of the UFOs itself. Photographer Wilfred Eisner was yet another witness to the strange lights in the sky.
They were there for a reason. There's no doubt about that. And there were more people that seen them than myself.
Eisner and two of his friends were burning an old boat on Mason's Beach, east of Shag Harbour.
On one of these times when I went for driftwood, I noticed a couple of lights in the sky. I thought it was kind of curious. And I thought, well, better take a picture.
He had planned to take photos of his boat for posterity, but instead, he captured the only existing photograph of the UFOs.
Well, that's it, right above where them people are.
The 5-minute time exposure he took that night yields interesting details about the nature of the objects.
First time I saw this slide, I was really impressed with the detail on it. Maybe you can explain the streaks and the colored lights in the middle of the picture itself?
Well, the streaks done were made, as you can see, by the stars, and that would be the length of the exposure, because the Earth is moving. And these three lights are obviously stationary, and they have left no streaks whatsoever. The third light would have appeared to me, I would presume, at this point in time, as a star.
Right.
You see.
Yeah.
But then it left no streak, so it was a stationary object for that duration of the exposure.
It's not a helicopter or any such object. A helicopter couldn't hover in position like that and stay that way for 5 or 7 minutes without moving and blurring the image. It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
Well, Chris Stahl and I figure this photograph is significant in the fact that it took place about an hour before the Shag Harbour incident. We're not claiming that this is the object.